Throughout the Sunnah, we learn of the importance of how we ought to interact with one another. How brothers interact with brothers, sisters interact with sisters. But also important, when we're living in a society of men and women, what are the limits, what are the boundaries and the parameters of our interactions with one another? Anyone would tell you today that if I work in a particular office, if I work, let's say, Uber, or I work in Walmart, it's necessary for me at some point to interact with people of the opposite gender. My co-workers, sometimes men, women, Muslim, non-Muslims. What is the decorum? What is the level of boundary that I need to maintain as a Muslim? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. You and I, we're created weak. And if we were left to our own devices, we would take advantage of the scenario, the situations, and fall into wrong. In fact, if you look at Western societies, one of the reasons why there's so much corruption is because the notion of gender relations has completely collapsed. There's no gender responsibility. Who's the mother in the home? Who's the father in the home? What is the relationship between friends? Can men have women, female friends or not? This is such an interesting concept in the West. Men and women are friends just like men and men are friends because the idea and notion of gender relations has completely collapsed. In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us clear directives. First and foremost, that men have certain roles in society, women have certain roles in society. And we ought to fulfill those roles adequately. And when there are times when there's a need for interaction, what should that level of interaction be? And what does the Sharia tell us about this? Because we know in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even then, the sahabiyat, the female sahabiyat, they used to come to the masjid. They used to ask the Prophet ﷺ questions. They would speak with some of the Sahaba, but what are the boundaries that we need to be mindful of lest we fall into a culture that we're saying we're Islamic, we're saying we're Muslim, we're saying we appreciate the gender norms, but we're no different than if you look at our congregations, we look at our relationships, compared to anybody else, there's no difference. So what are some of the things that the Sharia teaches us in terms of how we ought to interact with one another? I think it's fair to say anyone who lives in the West, in the modern West, in the world that we live in today, it's very difficult for someone to say women are not allowed to leave their homes and men are not allowed to interact with them. That's not going to happen. Our children are going to school, our children are going to college, our wives may need to work. There is a need for women to go out, for me to interact, but that is not a green light for me to do as I want nilly-willy. There are some things that I need to make sure I keep in mind. And in the hadith that we're going to cover today, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us some of these etiquettes and some of these guidelines. And inshallah, we'll expound on it. The first and most important thing that we have to remember in our interaction with one another is modesty and haya. Modesty and haya. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he encouraged his own wives and the sahabiyat that be very particular in your tone, in your interaction, in your conduct, in your comportment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells the azwaj mutahharat that when you're going to speak in a way that's professional. If somebody's coming and asking you something, speak in a way that's professional. Do not give off an alluring, seductive type of tone. Do not make any misleading, any type of suggestive comments. Keep everything professional. In the hadith today, Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, لا تتبع النظرة النظرة, that when you look, you're allowed to look the first time, but do not continue to gaze. Do not continue to enjoy each other's gaze. Rather, I'm speaking to somebody, I'll keep my gaze down. I'll look occasionally if I have to, but make sure that the relationship and the boundaries are understood as I will keep a distance. You can tell by the way I speak. SubhanAllah, this is something people in the workspace really appreciate about Muslims, that they would say whenever they speak, you can see that they're much more controlled, they have their eyes down, and you can tell that they're exuding a degree of chivalry, chauvinism, a degree of chauvinism, a degree of manlyhood, masculinity, that I'm not trying to prey on someone, I'm maintaining my boundaries. Nabi ﷺ says, do not look at someone. If you happen to look at somebody, that's fine, but do not look with the gaze and intent of deriving benefit. And between me and Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. When I'm looking at someone, if it's my boss, if it's my coworker, if it's somebody I have to meet in the grocery store, if I realize in that first interaction that my heart is not in the right place, I have to bring my gaze down right away. So the first thing, we make sure that there's modesty. What does modesty mean? Modesty means the way I'm dressed, my hand gestures, the way I am interacting with one another. SubhanAllah, Musa alayhi salam, when he went to get some water, and we know that Shu'aib alayhi salam's daughters were there by the well, and he got the water for them, he walked in a way so that he was in front, and that he walked in a way that they were completely separate, ala istihya, with modesty, so that they don't make each other feel uncomfortable. So the first thing is modesty. Modesty means that when we're speaking with one another, we don't make any suggestive comments. We don't try to be, sometimes being professional is important. You don't want to be rude also. Like when we're going to workplace, sometimes people feel that you have to be rude. You can be professional without being rude. You can be kind without being flirtatious. You can be understanding and cordial without being suggestive. These are very important principles that we have to bear in mind. Yes, if I'm not up to it, then I have to cut the relationship from the get-go. For some people, I'm not able to maintain these relationships, I'm not able to keep a professional decorum, then let me keep a distance because I'm failing miserably in my responsibility as a Muslim male or a Muslim female. The second thing is with our gaze. With our gaze, yes, out of professional conduct, if I need to look, I can look to speak, but I should interrupt it. Every once in a while, I should put my gaze down to show that the purpose of this interaction is to show that, listen, as much as we're speaking, understand that this is a necessity for me. I'm not speaking with you because I consider you a friend. I'm not sitting over here so I can joke around with you, so I can have a fun time. No, I'm speaking with you because we have our work to get done. You're my teacher in college, or you're my coworker. I have to get some work done. All right, fine. But you'll understand from my cues that I'm making sure that I'm averting my gaze every once in a while. I'm speaking to you in a way of respect. And we have to be careful over here. When we interact with the opposite gender, when we speak with one another, do not be disrespectful. We can be courteous, we can be kind without being disrespectful. Sometimes people are very rude, they're very harsh, they use very, very harsh language and they make the person feel low. We're not. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very sweet in his speech. He was very accessible to anybody who came to him. So we have to be kind, we have to be understanding with one another. But on the other hand, be controlled. The third thing that we learn is we should never be alone in a room with the opposite gender unless they're related to us. If I have a meeting, if I have an appointment, if I have a very important engagement that I have to speak with somebody, unless I'm unable to, I have to make sure that the door is open to the best of my ability. Why? Because I had a friend who once told me he had to go to the police precinct and the person in charge was a female, and he asked, can I keep the door open? And she said, no, this is protocol. That's understandable. Like, or you have to go to, get your visa and they're calling you inside a room. You do your best and you ask, saying that, listen, as my religion dictates, we feel more comfortable if the door is open. Or for instance, there's a window or something to show that people can see that we're not alone. This is something that happens very often. Whenever there's meetings, whenever there's consultation, whenever there's a need to speak, make sure it's done in a public space, not in a private space. And if it's done in a private space, make sure the door is open or there's a window into the place to the best of our ability. Again, we have to realize in the context that we're living in today, we don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, there's going to be no interactions. It's going to happen. But we need to follow what the Sunnah teaches us in terms of our interactions. So, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he tells us over here, لا تتبع النظرة النظرة. when you see someone, try not to look a second time. Sometimes we can see by accident, and that's fine. Because you're going to go out, speak, be controlled, but do not make it seem very seductive and very suggestive. The fourth and very important thing, and this is for many of our sisters, for whatever reason, if they have to, go to college, they have to go to school, they have to go to work, they have, ideally, remember, Islamically speaking, the house is the most ideal place to be. It is the most protective, it is the most filled with barakah and blessing, and it is the place where Rasulullah ﷺ says, Salah is the most rewarding. It is the place that protects our families from a lot of the whisperings and the ploys of shaitan. It's a very dangerous place out there, and anybody knows, as we've seen, even the West has come to terms with the whole Me Too movement recently, where they're saying that, oh, we're being harassed in the workspace, that I've also been harassed. They acknowledge that this whole project of female liberation and sending women out completely to the workforce has been a complete disaster. But the reality of the matter is, it's the circumstance that we're living in. How do we adapt and how do we maintain a degree of decorum? The next thing is making sure our awrah is covered. Making sure our awrah is covered. Especially for many of our brothers, when we're going out, when we're wearing clothes, let not our clothes be revealing. Or if our mothers and sisters and daughters are going out, they can be covered, but in a way that conceals their body, conceals their figure. This is both for men and women. Sometimes as men, we're going out, we want to make sure our muscles look good and it bulges from my clothing, or I'm wearing tight pants to the point that it's very uncomfortable. We have to be very mindful. And for my women folk, just make sure that the contours of my body is not revealing. SubhanAllah, nowadays, it's very tricky. Nabi ﷺ says a time will come, كَاسِيَاتٍ عَارِيَاتٍ. Some people are wearing clothes, but they're naked. SubhanAllah, it's a true issue that sometimes you'll even see in our community, certain people are wearing clothes that by name, they are considered Islamic clothing. But in terms of their tight fit, it becomes so alluring that at times, you would see somebody dressed in casual clothes not nearly as alluring as somebody who's dressed in quote-unquote Islamic clothes. We have to be very careful of this. Again, this is not to put anyone down, to make anyone feel bad. It's for our own protection. When Rasulullah ﷺ says, be dressed well, be mindful of your modesty, why is he doing this? It's so that I can protect myself from the advances of people with corruption in their heart. Don't you, subhanAllah, the level of, from people who have harassment charges to pedophilia charges out there, it's a very crazy world. And subhanAllah, when we practice on the beautiful parameters laid out by the Sharia, making sure we're not walking alone, we're going in groups, making sure I'm not wearing clothing that's alluring, I'm wearing clothing that's modest. When I speak with somebody, I don't make anything suggestive. I try to make sure I'm never alone. All of these maintain such a beautiful protective barrier around us, our family, our daughters, that it can protect us from a lot of the challenges people are facing in their homes. SubhanAllah, how many families are breaking because of this? A husband ends up somewhere he shouldn't be, a wife ends up somewhere she shouldn't be, and an entire family can break because of this. And again, Rasulullah ﷺ tells us, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't come near it. Zina is wrong. Fornication is wrong, but don't even come near it. Make sure you put certain things in place to prevent it from happening. So in summary, this is a very important topic, and I feel as a community, we need to educate ourselves. Why? Because we've gone into two extremes, like always. One extreme says, what is this concept of modesty? I'm gonna go, my hijab is my right, my body, my right. I can choose what I want. I wanna wear hijab, I wear it. I don't wanna wear hijab, I don't wanna wear it. I wanna wear shorts as a male, I can wear it. If I don't wanna wear it, I don't wear it. Who are you to tell me what I should do? It's my body. I wanna put a tattoo on, I can put it. It's a very liberated society that we're living in. And for sisters, they will say, it's my hijab, it's my body, I can dress how I want. That's one extreme. But what's the opposite extreme? The opposite extreme is, my daughters cannot go out, there can be no interaction, I will never speak with the opposite gender, because that's also an extreme given the society that we live in. We need to find the healthy balance in which we acknowledge the circumstances that we live in. Our children have to go to school at some point. Our children will go to college, we have to go to the workplace, we have to go shopping, we have to interact with one another. And it's oftentimes a shared space. Now, in and of itself, it's not wrong. What are certain things that I should do? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, first and foremost, maintain modesty in the way you conduct yourself. Never be suggestive, seductive, make somebody feel uncomfortable. Number two, lower your gaze so that the person realizes, subhanAllah, just the act of lowering the gaze immediately sets the tone. If you're ever speaking to somebody and you lower your gaze, immediately you will see it reflect on the other person as well. It's happened multiple times where I would go to the doctor, a nurse would come in and she would ask me some questions, I'd put my gaze down and I could notice a visible change in the way she's speaking to me right away because she can tell. And subhanAllah, I remember this happened recently where then she started telling me, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? And they become respectful of your space because you are being respectful of their space as well. Number three, make sure you're never alone unless it's absolutely necessary. Ask for a room to be open, the door to be open, or the window to be open so people can see. And very important for us that our bodies are concealed, modestly concealed. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Kasiyat ariyat." You can be dressed, but at the same time you're completely naked. We want to be dressed in a way that's modest, that if I want to maintain some level of appeal, that's fine. But let's try to wear more loose-fitting clothing, clothing that's not suggestive, and clothing that does not do tashabbuh and resemble people of immorality. Honestly, this is a very long topic, and inshallah someday in our masjid we can have a seminar on this so that we can educate ourselves what is the level of interaction and what are the guidelines of how our interactions should be, because it's a reality that we're facing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, protect our youth, give us modesty in our interactions, protect us from immorality and fahsha, and allow us to appreciate the context in which we live. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.